Welcome to Lesson 1 of the Managing Successful Teams course of the Nonprofit Bootcamp e-learning series. By definition, community-based work brings together a diverse mix of people with various experiences, strengths, and perspectives. In its highest form, this mix of voices can work in successful harmony, drawing out the best from individual participants who generate new ideas together. Sometimes, however, unaligned voices can create conflict and confusion. It takes effective leadership to bring a group into harmony and avoid chaos. Today's presenter is Amy Vasquez, principal of Amy Vasquez Consulting. For over 20 years, Amy has had a rich experience as a leader, fundraiser, and facilitator of organizations working for progressive change, raising over $200 million for clients and employers. As a consultant, Amy provides expertise in strategy and development for a variety of nonprofit organizations, helping clients increase their fundraising potential and build capacity. Amy is particularly passionate about and experienced in effecting positive changes in our food system. She has held national leadership positions in this sector, including the founding director of Chefs Collaborative, the development director for Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture, and the interim executive director for the Organic Farming Research Foundation. As a consultant, Amy has facilitated community-based local food plans and advanced strategic development projects with organizations such as Renew Niagara, the Ohio Food Policy Network, the Health Policy Institute of Ohio, and Wholesome Wave. Amy resides in Columbus, Ohio, where she manages Produce Works Columbus, part of Ohio's statewide farmers market incentive program, and volunteers for the Bexley Farmers Market and Franklin County Local Food Council. With that, I'll hand it over to Amy.
Andrew, thank you, and good afternoon to all of you. And I'm excited to get started on this series and this lesson this afternoon. Working to advance the slides. Here we go. Managing Effective Teams is a three-part series that begins today, and we will talk kind of from the macro to the micro over the course of the series, starting today with a session on the characteristics of teamwork, moving in next week to the idea of how your leadership role in a team can help strengthen its impact. And then in the third week, really talking about the brass tacks elements of how to navigate your way in and with successful teams. As members of this Food Systems Leadership Network, I think we all experience and know firsthand that community-led and community-driven organizations are key levers to food system change. So it follows that food systems work happens in teams. We individually don't have all the answers to solve big systemic change. And so we work in groups, sometimes better to better results than others. But we're going to get really plain and tactical today about how to improve that teamwork. The lesson today covers the basics of how teams are built, how you participate on teams, and we'll end with an alternative to thinking about how shared work in a team might move forward even when it's not perfectly aligned. Maybe you're new to leading a team, or maybe you have a clunky team you're a part of, and that's driven you to sign up for this workshop and participate today. But your experiences matter, and we will be able to draw on them in the office hours that follow. So I've put this check-in question here for all of you. Typically, when I facilitate groups in person, I ask that that people introduce themselves and state something personal about themselves so that we get to see and really hear from everyone around the table. But in this format, and with close to 100 people participating, having a round robin is really not feasible or time sensitive. But I think of a check-in as a way to really ground yourself in the material, and think of it as a yoga teacher might tell you to set an intention for your practice at the beginning of a yoga class. So here I'm asking you to check in with yourself by thinking of your favorite sports team. You may be in the neck deep in March Madness, or inspired by last week's opening day of baseball season and the beginning of spring, or you may be heading outside to participate in a rec soccer league. But whatever the team is, I ask you to kind of hold it close to you as we go through this lesson. What inspires you, how synergistic you find it, and why you're a fan. Obviously, we're talking about work teams over the course of this series, but that sports team and fandom hopefully keeps us motivated as we work through this lesson together. So what are we talking about? What is a team? A team is a group of individuals all working together for a common purpose. The individuals comprising a team ideally should have common goals and common objectives and more or less think along the same lines. I think the image here of the ants carrying the banana helps us think about kind of that working together result of a functioning team. And on teams, there is greater motivation to support a member in need. Your skills are complementary, and you have mutual accountability to one another and often shared leadership. And a team is distinguished from a group. I think these images help to illustrate that difference. A group not necessarily is the same thing as a team. Also, it can be a group of individuals, maybe with similar interests, but not necessarily so. And certainly difference in attitude and thought processes. It's not necessary that a group would have a common objective or a common goal to achieve. So in the case of the marathoners on the bottom, they are all running. They are doing the same activity, but it isn't necessarily, didn't come about with shared training or they're not wearing the same uniform. Their methods, their values are not necessarily commonly held, but more individually held. Whereas the boat above, all those men are wearing the same thing. They're rowing their oars in the same direction to the same beat to accomplish the shared goal of getting their boat over the finish line first. And why then do teams matter to food system work? This is an image you may have seen. There are several varieties that exist out there to describe the complexity of food systems. This one comes from the Ohio Food Policy Network. And it shows at the center the life cycle of food from production to processing to eating to food waste. And then the blue-green ring shows all the issues and areas of work that come out of food system work. And it by no means is meant to be comprehensive, but simply representative of the diversity from environmental protection to economic development to health and hunger, food safety. And then the outer ring shows the types of people who do various aspects of food system work. And recognizing that the training of someone in the public health space is very different than the training and the way people show up to work on farms or in halls of government. And really the underlying idea here is that because food systems are diverse and we're seeking food system change, the idea that we have teams of people and find ourselves in teams of people who have different skills, different backgrounds, different goals is likely to happen, and that our resulting change will be stronger with that compound experience, with those shared voices and broader attention of all aspects of the food system. That isn't to say that in your individual agency or organization, all of these people and themes are represented, but you may find yourself in the mix with some very strange bedfellows at times. So characteristics of a team. I think it's first and foremost important to understand that teams are made up of individuals, each with their own abilities and styles, strengths and weaknesses, biases and blind spots, and that the difference matters. There are differences in gender and age and race and education, sometimes language, but that coming together for the shared purpose doesn't erase those differences. And so as we're trying to build an effective team, paying attention to that diversity, whether you're a group of introverts and a group of extroverts, left brain or right brain, whatever that balance and mix might look like, pay attention to that makeup. Because to be effective, that balance, or that diversity then needs to come into some sort of balance. I like this image not just because of the fact that it kind of picks up the colors in my brand and complements the shape of the icon that I use, but I really like the strength that it shows, those hands holding on to one another in a coordinated and complementary effort. And it shows how an effective team, whether that's, an inner office team, whether you're on the same department or the board of an organization, that you may have different skill sets, but you're working together for the common purpose. You might have somebody who's creative, somebody who's got a financial background, somebody who's great at writing, somebody who's great at speaking. Or you might find that balance and coordination on an interagency team where you share in a community effort, or like an environmental coalition, for example, and represent different organizations. So the hands there aren't necessarily the difference in your skill set or the difference in your age or education, but different goals, different organizations with different goals, and training and processes. But all those differences are supported by an ability to trust one another, to trust that working together gets the job done. And trust is no small feat to accomplish when you are trying to overcome sometimes what can be deep differences. And in this image, we show an acronym that Brené Brown has put forward as a way of building trust or defining trust among a team. This is from her book, Rising Strong. She says that trust is a braving connection. And braving represents the words here: boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, and non-judgment. In order to build trust, you have to set and respect clear boundaries. You have to be reliable, reliably reliable, more than once. To build trust, you need to be accountable for your own mistakes, to keep conversations you have with your teammates in a vault, to act from a place of integrity, and to practice non-judgment, no judgment for struggling for yourself or for others. And that comes from assuming the most generous thoughts about the words, intentions, and behaviors of those on your team. Teams are places where it's safe to risk being vulnerable, and that's not an activity that we regularly or easily engage in. And in her most recent book, Dare to Lead, Brown goes on further to talk about the importance of rumbling with that vulnerability in order to build the trust among your team. When you registered for this class, we asked that you talk about characteristics of or tactics of leaders that you've worked with or for who have really led successful teams. As you may be familiar with the word cloud, the frequency of the words that help to make those that appear most frequently the biggest. So here, good questions, clarity, transparency, humility, and listening were some of the qualities that you all said were characteristics of leaders in strong teams. You also said that other qualities included tact, timing, understanding, delegation, and accountability. Your leaders organized a clear plan. They were open to questions and suggestions, and encouraging. Somebody else said, my supervisor provided a vision for the team and then allowed the team to spend time collaboratively building out the strategy. Some people said, I honestly am struggling to respond because my supervisor is not as helpful as a leader as I'd like them to be. So we all come from different experiences in what makes a successful team, and we can talk more about that in the office hours. So as we said, and when you're building a team, diversity matters. You may be existing on a team where there's diversity, and thinking about ways to overcome it is a little bit different than thinking about building a team from scratch. Obviously, complex systemic change requires a diversity of approaches in your thoughts and your skills. And so it makes sense that the diversity of individual skills and strength of your team matters. This idea of complementing the gaps starts from a place of knowing yourself and knowing who's on your team, so you can fill in the places where your current individuals fall short. Someone who's strategic and planful can be balanced out by someone who's a creative dreamer or a risk taker. It's also important in working in building teams to make sure you're including the subject expertise of whatever you're tackling. So if you're starting a new after-school program, getting the input of the students that you want to engage, or their parents or their teachers, might help you build a more authentic and responsive program, meeting them where they are. Often in the work that I do, we talk about bringing local food to an institution or improving the viability of local farm sales without ever including a farmer in the conversation, or only one farmer with one perspective. So really going out and finding that subject expertise in your team is really helpful. But the last bullet there is really about reminding you to stay and go where the energy is. This is an example of more when you're building a board. I think we sometimes get stuck on the fact that we need a lawyer and we need a finance person and we need a variety of people to check the boxes of the matrix that we have designed on paper to be the perfect balanced representation of our board. But if that lawyer or that finance person has no interest in your mission, they may not be a fit, and the struggle to find someone who checks all those boxes may take you away from getting to good work. So I would say keep in balance those last two bullets, including the subject expertise you need to complement the gaps, but remember to stay where the energy is. When you're building a team, it's also important to think about fostering teamwork again and again. Because of that diversity, relationships must come first in order to build that trust. Don't assume that a relationship is given just because you both work for the same organization or you're serving on the same board, and be clear and tactical about establishing and building relationships with your teamwork. You can do that by sharing the power and the benefits of leadership, perhaps taking turns running meetings or sharing in the development of minutes. In the office hours, we can discuss ways that you've worked to share power on your teams. And a note about power, there are many forms, right? It doesn't only come in this idea of power over, which is that hierarchical power that we're most familiar with. There's power with, which is collaborating, and power for, which is advocating. And power just doesn't evaporate because you're bringing people to the table to work on a project or to share in the leadership of an organization. So pay attention to those levels of power and the power dynamics that exist in your team. One exercise that I've liked as a way to build trust among my team is this idea of building or creating a safe container. It's a way to get team members to sort of say what helps them and what hinders their participation on a team. This is an exercise that was also developed by Brene Brown and shared in Dare to Lead. And the people who participated in this exercise cited things that helped them participate in a team were listening and staying curious, keeping confidence, and the things that got in the way of that trust and that teamwork were judgment, unsolicited advice giving, and interrupting. This exercise came out of a 5-year study at Google on productive teams that identified psychological safety, the team members feeling safe to take risks and vulnerable in front of each other was far and away the most important of the 5 dynamics that set successful teams apart. This psychological safety makes it possible to give or seek tough feedback, to take risks, to speak up, to admit a mistake without worrying about maintaining your good image. So in our office hours, maybe we can talk about other ways you have successfully created ground rules like these with your team, whether you did it at the beginning of a tough discussion or did it from the outset of a fiscal year. There are lots of ways that you can work to create safe containers or ground rules that help you get to higher ground together. And lastly here from Brene, the idea that leaders must either invest in a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. So it's counterintuitive to say that vulnerability might lead to trust, but doing so, setting the stage for good behavior helps to mitigate some of the ways that bad behavior kind of undermines our effectiveness of working together. So talking about participating on a team, you can be a team leader or a team member, and here just is a quick way to differentiate. The leader organizes the group, monitors and understands the roles, provides direction and feedback, and a member understands their own role and performs it and understands how it supports the success of the whole. And there may be cases where you're co-leading, you're both a member and a leader, but it's helpful to keep these two kind of, distinctions in mind. As a leader, their leadership comes in several forms, and we'll get to that next week, but I thought I would provide just a little bit of this idea of leader as host. This is really an idea of servant leadership. Leaders who are hosts share in the leadership, draw on the strengths of the others on your team. You come with questions, not necessarily all the answers, and work with your teammates to co-create the agendas and the outcome and facilitate their participation, drawing on their strengths. And the idea of leader as hero is really that subject matter expert who has the answers and motivates, inspires, sometimes incentivizes others to come along with their vision. Maybe it's a co-created vision, but for the most part, there's the leader as hero is someone who's taking charge. And different scenarios may require different kinds of leadership. There's not to say one is necessarily better than the other, but it's important to think about both approaches and where they can be effective. And team participation can come as a member of a team, right? Not only as a leader. And it's important to keep in mind as you're participating in a team, the idea that you're probably there for your skill set, so your expertise matters, but there are others on the team who also have skill sets and expertise that matters, so don't let your own expertise get in the way. This idea of getting good work done together rather than being right, and practicing grace. Those are all ways that you can show up to a member of a team and ensure its success. And lastly here, I offer this model, and we might talk about it more in future lessons. This is an idea developed by a colleague of mine here in Columbus named Tuesday Reinhardt, who has a company called The Outside. Tuesday is a facilitator whose work I really admire. She helps groups working on really large-scale systems change as a facilitator. And this model came out of deep experience she has working on big, big systemic problems, where often the differences of the people in the room get in the way of getting work done. So in this case, she puts the idea of shared work at the center, rather than that typical way we organize ourselves often where we come up with a shared vision. When the differences are so great that coming to a shared vision seems impossible or takes forever, maybe there's a way to identify a project that you can work on together to keep things moving forward. The idea that the work is the container that brings us together. This model allows for those differences in the room, and the idea that working together towards a resolution is the way that you can build relationship and stay moving forward. So the first point off to the right, the idea of relationship is resolution, that you stay curious. Point number 2, inquiry as answer, or staying in inquiry, staying curious with the people around the table and the perspectives that they bring that may be completely foreign to you or oppositional to you. And then that you're working with multiplicity and many levels at once, which can get complicated for people, particularly as we're often hardwired just to work on our one mission or our one goal. You don't leave that behind, you bring it and stay present with it and stay in conversation. This is a particularly effective model when you find yourself stuck. And you can ask the group, what are we willing to do now? How can we move forward together? This might not be something you need at your staff meeting. I hope it's not, although I have worked on some pretty oppositional teams sometimes, but more likely where you find yourself on a food council or a community coalition addressing big systemic issues. And so that wraps up my presentation today. I appreciate you being here with us today. I hope the image of your sports team, your dream team, kept things light and positive for you, even though many of us come with negative experiences from our past teamworks and perhaps not functioning teamwork, that the image of the team you're a fan of kept things moving and light for you. Our objective today was to provide a framework for thinking about teams, as well as some practical tools to bring to your day-to-day application. And in the nuts and bolts section that follows in the office hours, we'll dig into those practical shared learning opportunities even more. So I encourage you to stay with us, and Andrew will help tell you more about how to do that. So thank you. I look forward to having you join us next in the Zoom meeting that follows, and in the next 2 lessons of managing effective teams. Thank you.